All right, everybody, and welcome to Befriend Your Shadow. I've been so excited to do this live stream, and I have a wonderful guest coming on today, Katherine Shai. She's a 7-time Team USA wrestling champion. We worked together in her lead up to the Olympic trials, where she was sort of doing, I mean, you could kind of call it a comeback, but you were doing something that was pushing the limits probably of what had been what the traditional, I guess, wrestling path would be, which would be to go for the Olympics after having a baby and being a seasoned athlete. And this show is really about dealing with the psychological stuff when we push a threshold, and nobody really pushes a threshold more than somebody who's going for the Olympics, basically, and competing at a top national and international level in a sport, basically. So Katherine, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I actually literally made myself sick with excitement for this this YouTube live because one of my specialities, I've been doing this like mind body energy work, healing work for since 2004, and because one of my specialities is the nervous system and its impact on our consciousness and how much it actually controls us and what we need to do to transcend the contracting influence of the nervous system so we can go into new and unknown territory. I took up skydiving so I could really do kind of like a master course on this. And when I got into the skydiving world, I found that there was so much in that community that to me were indicators of liberated consciousness, not so much because people are on this like personal development journey where I had been in like the spiritual world and personal development world for a long time, but just in that the act of skydiving created this opportunity for people to transcend their nervous system. And I think this is a real gift that sports and other kind of extreme activities can give people, because once you take mastery over your nervous system and you're aware of how it's controlling you, and you take a more conscious process into your life, and with that you can move into new realms of experience that your nervous system would have held you back from before. And so I'm actually very passionate about integrating and helping people understand that the spiritual path doesn't have to look like, a person in a caftan on a mountain clutching a whole bunch of crystals. And actually, if you want to have I think what can happen a lot of times with the spiritual community, because there's so much with the meditating and the reflecting, that there can be a resistance to the actual movement work and the body part of kind of mind, body, spirit. Where once I started getting more interested in sports psychology and stuff like that, I started seeing a really strong intersection with the way athletes were approaching transcending their own consciousness as a way to go further with what they were doing. And so they're kind of like, by default, everybody's a little bit of a guru, I think, when they're at that level. So, Katherine, tell us a little bit about your story, how you came to work with myself, what made you choose to go a little bit more woo-woo and a little bit more down the rabbit hole in order to achieve this to go after this goal that was a big one.
I started wrestling pretty young and took the path of, I knew I wanted to go the Olympic route. I knew that like very early on. And I had influences around me. My dad was an Olympian and my sister was on that path, and she was 3 years older than me, is 3 years older than me. And so I had this like viewpoint right ahead of me of here's what you do, here's how you get there. You just kind of put in the work. So leaving high school, wrestled in college, and then moved out to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And that's when that journey kind of began.
Right.
And while I was there, ideally the entire training center is focused around making it the best possible situation for your training. And as much as I really strongly believe that that was the place for me and the right thing at the time, and I was there 2010 to 2016. So I had 2 Olympic trials during that time. I had 2012 Olympic trials. I was 3rd at that Olympic trials. And that was a pretty big jump for me, because at the time I was not making the national team, which is top 3. And that was my first big national team jump. And I kind of put together like, wow, I can really peak myself. I can do this.
Right.
And lost to the eventual Olympian Kelsey Campbell at that Olympic trials, and then trained another 4 years exclusively at the Olympic Training Center to 2016.
Right.
So that was my journey at the time. And I was, late 20s. Well, was I 28? I'm trying to remember now. And after 2016, lost to the eventual Olympic champion, Helen Maroulis, who was our very first Olympic champion for the US.
Right.
So after that, knew that it was time to take a break or do something. And we decided to leave. My husband and I decided to leave Colorado Springs and move up to Denver. And I kind of was like toying with the idea, like, could I still train? Would I train up here in Denver? This whole package of the Olympic Training Center had been shown as the cream of the crop, like deep train, right? Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of situations where women were training outside of the Olympic Training Center. But, so then as things progressed, decided like I need to step back for my happiness. I needed to have a shoulder surgery and repair after years. That had been such a long process of healing from that shoulder, and it was time to just have surgery, unfortunately. And then from there, we're like, well, let's start a family. Like, we've been putting this off for a long time for training. Like, it's a completely different scenario for women, for sure, right? That's like a whole nother topic. Right?
Yeah, yes.
But after having my son in 2017, I slowly just felt that like itch crawl back. And it was a lot more of, I think I can do this better. I think I was really hard on myself. Like all these thoughts kept coming in, and having that giant gap, just like, not only did I walk away from wrestling, but I would like moved away from my wrestling circle. Everything was completely different. So I felt like there was some space to where maybe I could totally change the way I approached my training. I could change the mindset, everything, right? So it kind of started with that. And then, like most of us, like a lot of people, 2020 hit, and I was already starting to search in this like deeper, more awareness. And I'd already been working with my sports psychologist for a lot of years before that. And he was very big into mindfulness and put me on that kind of like viewpoint of, the observer and all these different kind of like unique perspectives and how to be present in the moment for wrestling, which we'll definitely get into that, because that is the key everyone's trying to find, how to be present in the middle of complete chaos and in fight or flight.
Yeah. So, like, the world right now is like, this is the mission, which is really why I wanted to bring on somebody who's so trained in having to find stillness and presence under duress and threat. I mean, it is a masterclass, isn't it?
Oh yeah, every day it's a masterclass. Every competition, it's reintegration of what happened 2 seconds ago, so you have to adjust for the next match. I mean, that intensity is to me, it's like nothing else. And as soon as I was making this return, I had this perspective that kind of things would fall away. Like, oh, I figured it out. I'm a little more mature, and it'll come a little bit easier this time. And it still wasn't really coming as easy as I hoped it would.
Mm.
So I started recognizing just this whole idea of shadow work, and what did I need to actually let go of? Like, what was I holding on to that I just felt like I physically couldn't let go of? And that's, I mean, then Gaia, I had a friend, it's been, I would say it's outside influences, right? Who are like, check out this thing called Gaia. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I just ate up every one of those episodes. And for some reason, yours just resonated. It just really resonated. And then I took that as a sign.
Yeah.
And then I like binged on the podcast, and it just got me so excited to learn about like the brain. Why are we behaving the way we do? Why am I attached to these things? I mean, it just fascinated me. Yeah. And so to me, it was a little bit of like a no-brainer, like, let's work with Georgia.
And that had been because so much of my work has been working with, like, say, chronic physical conditions where the emotional charge, the psychological charge, and how it's connected to the body and actually brings disease, or our capacity when we process, that was really my expertise, was how to process mental and emotional charge so the body can reorganize itself and reconfigure itself and start operating properly, because there's so much hidden contraction in the body that eventually when there's people aren't addressing what we're actually contracting down on, which is emotion and memories and stuff like that, it leads to disease. So all my background and specifically what I found was working with a lot of like people who had cancer and things like that, who are very beautiful, spiritual, positive, wonderful people who had gotten very sick, was that the survival emotions like anger and rage and shame, all these things, were often the biggest culprits, because in our quest to be nice and positive and spiritual, there's just like a huge amount of suppression of those emotions that were really getting buried in the body, basically. And so when you were just bringing up about things not coming easier to you, and we just talked about this before, did you, in order to access your body to wrestle again at that level, how much of a correlation did you find with, once you sort of mentally, emotionally processed things, that your body became more available?
Yeah, I would have sessions, and this was even leading up to 2021 Olympic trials, like right to the very end. My husband started becoming my coach, which was an incredible journey in its own. But having somebody that close to you, especially if it's somebody who you can be really vulnerable with, those things just come up so quickly. So I would have these sessions and I would dive right into like, I'm the worst wrestler. I cannot do this. Like all these things would have to just literally fall out of me in order to process the emotions, go through it. And the whole time, I mean, mostly it's shame. It's intense.
Shame. Oh my God. Yes. Thank you for sharing that.
Of like, why can't I do the technique? Like I can see it in my head, like I can see my opponent doing, I can see them sprawling on me and defending it. And it's so intense. But what combats it is really like that. It's the thing that our parents have always told us, right? Like you fall off the horse and you have to get back on. Right. And it's something we all kind of use in our normal like adage, but to actually process something and then have to work through it.
Yes.
And then look at your coach or whoever your supporter is, and they say, okay, so now you're ready to do it. Like, do it again.
Yes.
That's the integration that you then have to go through to say, all right, well, I'm going to do it. And most of the time, like it was never good. It was never better. I just had to work through it and keep going.
To keep going. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I mean, in my life, I've done a few things like stand up and obviously skydiving. And I started skydiving at 44, like most of the people that I skydive with. like literally half my age. And it's my capacity to work with the shame, which is can be almost constant, over anything. Like I just feel a generalized shame that I'm not 25, when I find that it's taking me longer to learn things. And it's because when you do adrenaline sports, shame is one of the survival emotions. So it's actually very natural that it would come up along with fear and along with anger, all these survival, motivating energies. But when people don't have a capacity to feel shame and keep going, that's really what stops them from keeping going. Because the only reason I'm still going at skydiving 7 years later, and after I was told on my third jump that you're probably one of the people in the world who can't do this, your brain can't do it, was that it's my capacity to not let shame push me back from the thresholds that I want to cross, and instead learn how to feel it and work through it. And just, as you said, keep going, because it isn't always about, although I have actually had huge breakthroughs after I've processed shame, like my age, I've got a weak left arm, whatever it is, and I'll have a big breakdown. I have PTSD from my time doing stand-up, and that's can be a source of a lot of shame, and it's definitely come up during my skydiving journey, that I've had to process all of that. Like, I'm not a perfect person without trauma or without, any of that stuff. And because the shame as a survival emotion is so horrible to feel, because it exists as a survival emotion when we're in the caves, it motivated people to do their part so the cave could survive, like pick enough berries. Otherwise, the feeling of shame, that when the tribe ostracizes you, you're going to die. So there's a reason why shame is such a strong emotion, because it's a survival emotion, but it's so hard to feel. It is that capacity to recognize that it's actually just this energy. And even though I feel terrible while I'm feeling it, I can't let that stop me from keeping on going, because growth, getting better, it only happens when you keep going, right? Would you agree?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think most of the time when we're in the most intense feelings of shame, we're actually recognizing that we have a choice, and that choice is intensely difficult to make. And because I can feel that. I can feel like, hey, you have a choice to just breathe, pick up, and move on.
Right,
but,
right.
And whether that also involves a lot of outward emotion or not, sometimes just picking, I like to call it the easy button. And that's what I literally use with my son, because I can see him wrestling with those intense emotions of I want this to be hard because I want to prove something to myself. You want to prove that you can't do it. And it's really, and then there's shame on top of that, because you're why am I trying to prove that I can't do it? Why?
Yes.
Why am I doing this to myself? Why this? That's the self-sabotage idea. And I think that it's scary in a sport perspective when it shows up at the most intense moment. I'm sure you've experienced some of that when you're jumping out of the plane, you have that intense emotion. That's a straight up dangerous, right?
Well,
I mean, you're I can't have these at that time.
Well, you know what it's really shown up, honestly, was so just talking about shame, and I'm actually really glad this came up right at the beginning, because the way shame unconsciously controls us, and so most people won't push their threshold because somewhere they know that if they push it, they might feel shame. So for most people, it's just, for a lot of people, I don't want to everybody in the world, but for so many people, they don't even realize that they're not doing anything, because deep inside them, they're afraid of feeling shame. And so they just don't even start. They have a goal, they have a dream, and it just remains that way, because the feeling of shame is also resonant with death, dying. Oh my God, I would die with shame, right? that in order to not feel the depth of that uncomfortable feeling, they just don't do anything at all, and the dreams remain dreams, and then life just kind of keeps going. And so I've already been aware of this before I got into skydiving, the controlling, and I wanted to experience how much my survival emotions were controlling my way of thinking, and to be able to see it very clearly, and simultaneously have the tools to address them so that it didn't take over the whole journey, basically. And when the guy told me I was one of the people in the world who can't do it, which is already pretty embarrassing, like, you know, like you're basically, it was like, basically your brain can't do this. Like you can't operate under these conditions. Like you've just got a faulty brain. Afterwards, because I'm already very in touch with the other side, I don't really have a general fear of dying. That's not a concern for me, because I'm like, I'm consciousness and I'll actually be free in a different way. So I'm not worried about that. So I had to really explore, because I was sitting on the plane just in such a state of contraction and physical pressure and misery, that, after I decided to keep going, that it took weeks for me to actually have a moment where I went into my body and into the physical pressure. I was on a bus going up to the drop zone, and I was just on the bus, and all my friends who were like, of course I went through skydiving training with all these people who were like total naturals. Like there was a bunch of like MMA champs, like some of the Gracie brothers were there, these kind of like physical naturals. And then I'm like with my hula hoop, and and everyone was landing, like standing up their landings, and everyone was coming down smiling and laughing and having like the greatest time. And I was just like in this like personal hell, except for my work. I knew that at a certain point, if I kept going, as long as I kept going, I would train my brain to accept the experience, and it wouldn't always be that way. But I had to really go into my body. I was going up to the drop zone, and I was just feeling terrible, and there was still a couple of jumps I had to do to pass my license, and I just couldn't. I was like, this is horrible. And it wasn't until I went into my body to discover what was the actual issue, because it wasn't about dying. And what was actually pushing back at me was the concept of the shame that I would feel if I hurt somebody else after I had already been told that I wasn't capable of doing this, or B, if I hurt myself and became a burden to somebody after I had already been told that I wasn't capable of doing this. And that unconscious shame, which I could only make conscious by going into my body and discovering what it was. Once I did that, that was one of the first points where I physically became liberated, because the irony of skydiving is you've got to jump out of the plane and relax, in order to do to actually do the thing. And I'm sure very similar with you. With wrestling, is that you have to be present and in the moment in this, as you told me, which actually surprised me. We were talking about it one day, and it hadn't, because I think when we look at wrestling, it's like these moves that look quite orchestrated and choreographed. It's so stupid, because this is a conversation after we'd worked together. I actually hadn't processed how much fear you actually have before going into a match, right?
Oh, right. And I remember we talked about this because I brought up how there's fear about being injured, which is a very normal occurrence in wrestling.
Right.
And you can feel someone's intensity right away. And your mind is trying to predict and judge what's happening in real time. And so the moment you shake hands, your body and your mind's like judging that, like, and that's something that like the youngest or the most beginners have to like get used to, because they will come off the mat and they'll be like, they shook my hand so hard, and I'm like, yeah, and then you got lost in that handshake, and then the rest of the match you were gone.
Right.
So it can start there. So the training starts at that time, learning. You got to get past just the handshake of someone squeezing it really hard, because it doesn't. I've had women and girls who like shook my hand so hard, and then I was like, oh, they don't really know how to wrestle. Okay. You know, and it's amazing how your mind judges that so intensely. But you can feel if you're not in a position where you are mentally present, prepared to like you were saying, relax and
Mm,
actually, you know, have intensity, but then also relax with what's happening. So you can be so present that without directly thinking about it, you can just react from
mm,
what you've trained instead of trying to do the moves. Because
right,
if you're trying to force things, you will force yourself out of position and
right.
potentially into injury. And you can feel that person's intensity and you're like, am I matching? Am I
Right.
matching intensity or am I falling a little flat? And that can start the reoccurring thoughts, the fears, the stepping out of your mind being present, which it has to be there.
And that actually, when you talk about that handshake, it is also like when I did stand up, and actually the first 10 seconds that you're on stage is what makes or breaks it for you. Because if you don't capture the audience immediately, and it doesn't go well right from the top, there is that cascading hopelessness that starts to take over your body because you're under pressure. Now you're not in the moment anymore. You're actually
Yeah.
analyzing, and there's that bit of panic that's kicked in, which is not the same state that you're in when you're in the zone and you're really operating from a zone place where you like you can't touch this when you're in the zone, right? So
Right.
so that's very interesting. Yeah, that psychological, and that reminds me of your last match when you were I was watching the trials, and you don't even remember this, but your competitor like did something like tapped you on the head in this like kind of a dick move, honestly. And I was all like, what's this cow doing?
You're all worked up.
I got all worked up on my also mother hen. Like I was like, so rude. I was like, but I'm curious from your as a competitor, because this is the difference, I think, between sports and then being out in the real world. Like when people are going for, say, you know, because you know, maybe people are going for a job, or they're going for like a big deal that they're maybe competing with other people for. The rules of engagement with sport is a little bit different from real life, basically, in that sense. So in terms of sportsmanship, you know, those kind of psychological games, did you play those kind of psychological games where maybe you do a little bit of a dick move or something
Oh,
to,
I
to
think I think there's hardly a wrestler who's reached like the level of, you know, world and Olympic levels that hasn't. Uh,
right,
I think
right.
you've been through so many different scenarios, or somebody's like doing the dick move to you, so you kind of are like, well, this is how I'm gonna do it back, you know, or
Yeah.
whatever. So there's absolutely there's a ton of that for
So
sure.
what was your favorite dick move to do to like psych somebody out?
Oh, oh my gosh,
Because
just
you're such
psychs.
an appealing person, you know, like when I met you as well, I'm surprised at, because you think wrestling, but you're really cool. I mean, that's your what is it, your level or whatever, but you're quite a petite person as well.
Mhm, mhm.
When you meet you in person and you're so, you know, you're like, you know, sweet and blonde, like, how do you get your beast up so you can get the edge?
Yeah, I think that's something that I actually struggled with. And I
Mm,
would say it was more like internalizing everybody else's perceptions of me.
mm,
And I was told by friends, oh, you could be a kindergarten teacher, which there's nothing wrong with kindergarten teachers or like any of that. And I love children. So I'm like, sure, I could do that. But then when I realized it was like not really a compliment to be a compliment, it was kind of
right.
like you're meek,
Benign.
you're
Yeah.
nice, that's
Yeah.
how you deal with people, like almost like you're a bit of a pushover. And that really
Right.
bothered me because deep down that's not who I am. It was like my people pleasing showing up, and this
Right.
was like so many years ago.
Right.
So I do think that part of my return to wrestling was I'm sick of people pleasing, because I would even people please like in the wrestling room, like make sure my partner was like getting in the reps you need. Oh, did you get this right or whatever? But I had like my mean streak. Like I had a few things that were questionable for sure. I had a match so many years ago. I don't even remember what year it was, 2009 maybe, I don't know. Me and this one woman, we like hit heads, and she ended up with a huge knot, and it wasn't because we just happened to hit heads, it was because I was the one that hit a little harder. So it was like my anger would come out, and not in the most productive ways,
Right.
but it was probably because I was like people pleasing throughout and not putting myself first, my needs first in my trainings. It was like teamwork and collaboration, and it took a long time for me to realize that wasn't really benefiting me. But then like, how did I do that without being selfish? How did I be this warm person, you know?
Yeah, because, and again, something like anger, which is part of the survival set emotions, getting fired up in those circumstances is totally understandable, because somebody else is essentially trying to destroy you. So from my perspective, I can see that anger energy and like coming up under those conditions. But you're absolutely right that a lot of times when we're people pleasing, we're actually suppressing our needs as a human being, and that creates anger and resentment. And I, you know, because a lot of women, for example, are taught to be giving all the time and give. And, you know, I had a Catholic background, you know, I converted to Catholicism like a little Bible basher in grade 6 because I wanted to like belong to something, you know, and I was all like, but that, you know, and it probably wasn't until, well, I don't know at what point it was, I was in my mid-30s or something, that I realized giving isn't really giving if you're being resentful or angry underneath. And the only giving you should really do is the giving that you can do genuinely, unconditionally. Because if you're being motivated by some old framework, like be a good girl or it's actually not genuine to who you are and maybe what your needs are. And that's where you get that that anger come up. And where we have a lot of shame about feeling anger as well. We have a lot of shame about feeling all of these emotions. And a big part of our work is to actually let these emotions come up and feel them as energy, rather than good or bad, or that you're a good or bad person for having these emotions. So
right. And that was, I mean, I think as we worked through like love and acceptance, and I mean, there were a lot of instances. I remember going down, so during COVID, we had like basically a really shitty training situation where no one could come down unless you went through all this process to go down to the Olympic Training Center, because I was still like utilizing it. I'm like about an hour and a half from Colorado Springs and Denver, so I could still go down. But you know, if I went down, I had to go down for a couple of days. It was just like too hard to travel back and forth. And I distinctly remember, I swear to you, writing like 2 pages of love and acceptance, because this trip I went down, it was like nothing was clicking for me. Nothing felt right. It wasn't working. I was working with these, you know, my coaches I've known for a long time, but they're not my like direct coaches anymore. And I'm not the athlete at the training center. Like there was so much emotion with that.
Yeah.
Because I knew that part of this journey was healing from being in a situation where you had coaches, but then the situation is that they are the national team coaches. So once you go step on the mat and you want to go make a world Olympic team, they cannot be in your corner. So essentially,
because they're in everybody's corner.
Because they're gonna be the team that makes it, that they're the coaches for the people who make it.
Right.
It's a really sticky situation, and it brought up so much like anger and frustration. And I was doing like all this love and acceptance work, and I think it was probably right around when we first had, you know, we've probably been working together for like quite a couple months, 6 months maybe. And I mean, it's just, sometimes it's, and this is what I think, coming back to doing it anyways, right? Doing the love and acceptance work and not feeling like it's changing anything. I'm hoping that I go in the next day and I'm like a renewed person. But of course, like it takes integration, and it takes like your mind and your body connecting. And it wasn't connecting that trip. And it just didn't connect to that trip. but
Right.
then it was like the progression to the next thing. And
Yep.
for whatever reason, sometimes it's easy, and I'd love to hear more on this. Sometimes it's easy to fall in the trap of like always uncovering something. They definitely fell into that. Like, well, what is wrong? How do I find the
Right.
thing that's
Okay.
wrong to release that pent up feeling I have so that my
Yeah.
body will release and I can perform
Yes.
how I want to
Yeah.
without fear, right? Or just like within the presence of fear, really. So, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts
Well, this
on.
is really interesting. So first of all, just for people who aren't so familiar with the work that we do, is that a big part of the work that we do in order to integrate these shadow emotions, we actively, have this technique called resistance, activation, and release. And we actually have techniques where you go into the body or you stimulate, and I'm sure we did some of this stuff, like worst case scenarios, so that unconscious energy that's actually resonating with that, with the shame, with the fear or whatever it is, can actually start to become conscious. And then once it starts coming up, we use love and acceptance as a way to integrate this energy, rather than being like, oh, I'm good for having this or I'm bad for having this. It's just like, okay, I love and accept the part of me that's angry, and I love and accept the part of me that's sad, and I love and accept the part of me that doesn't believe I can do this, and I love and accept the part of me that believes I can do it. And where that technique came from was working with people. Well, it's just part of our work that we do. But when you have such strong suppressive body mind mechanisms, so say for children in a family, showing anger in one family might be fine. In another family, everyone's like, Timmy, quiet down. So, Timmy's like pushing all this, emotional energy down in order to belong to the family. We develop such complicated systems of suppression that actually go into the body, because a lot of the times I always use this example that if you say you're going to work and you have to go to a meeting, and you like your boyfriend's broken up with you or something on the way to work, and you want to cry, and then you got to go in the meeting and be like, hey, let's bring out the presentation about the sales, blah blah blah. So you're smiling, but you're using this muscular effort in the face to mask this emotion underneath, because if you actually try to cry, you're going to force that smile even more. And what people don't realize is from a very early age, we learn this contraction. And so things like clenching butt cheeks or curling toes can actually be, and if everybody wants to do this right now, if you curl your little pinky toe, which might be an unconscious activity you're doing, you'll notice that it's creating tension all the way up through your legs. Most people aren't aware about this subtle system of contraction in the body that suppresses emotions. And so when we're talking about unlocking the body, which is basically what you're talking about, and you have almost like a first wave of thoughts, feelings, and emotions that will start when you start moving the body. And a lot of the reason why people don't want to move, they don't want to exercise, they don't want to run, they don't want to push themselves physically, is because unconsciously they know that if they start moving the body, all this stuff that's buried in the body is going to come and surface. And because we are not taught in school, and maybe it's happening more now, how to actually process emotions in a neutral way, the thought of these emotions coming up is too frightening, that people just don't move, and instead they just keep still. So often the first wave of when people start using the love and acceptance is you're building what I call an integrated energy field, where you've done enough love and acceptance on maybe like this belief structure that I'm, not, say for me in skydiving, like I've had to do a lot with my concept of age and what I'm doing, because as my body's getting weaker, can I be more of a danger? It's like a constant threshold for me that I'm always working with. So annoying, but anyway, I'm constantly doing it. But once you have an integrated amount of love and acceptance and a core self, that is when the real shit can start coming up. That's when the shame can start coming up. And it's the things like the shame, because you already have enough self-love and acceptance integrated, that those really volatile emotions like shame, like rage, can actually start to safely emerge. So that's why you don't get I'm always, have to say to people, you've got to trust this process, because people will be like, well, I'm doing it. Wow, or there's such a it's learning to trust the process is as much as connected to our ability to learn to trust ourselves to feel this stuff without being taken down by it, basically. And that's what I mean by my capacity to keep going, even though shame is always like nipping at my heels, is that I ultimately trust this process, and that I do, even though it's uncomfortable, I do have a capacity, a certain amount of self-love that gives me a container to have all that stuff emerge and keep, even though I might be hating myself in that moment as it's coming up, my trust is in continuing the process through the worst parts. That's when the breakthroughs really tend to happen. And I know that we've talked before about crying, because there's so much shame around crying, like culturally, whatever, we have so much shame about crying. And a lot of the times I'm teaching people how to cry safely, and just like, it's okay, you're not a terrible person because you want to cry. But even for myself, when skydiving or being in the tunnel has pushed me to start crying, I felt so embarrassed that I remember asking you and being like, Katherine, did you cry much during your training? And you were like, all the time.
I mean, I remember after Olympic trials, that was the process.
Yeah.
I mean, we call and it was like cry and let it out. And that was so hard. And I could feel like, wow, I could still feel that I don't want to like let it all out.
Right.
It was hard.
Right.
It was really hard to cry, let the cry come and let those things come. And then like, it's so funny because then like shame just keeps coming back, because it's like, why can't I cry enough?
Georgia wants me to cry and we're not crying.
Right. Aren't crying enough for her. Oh my gosh, right? It's wild. And
that would never literally be a thought I would ever.
Well, I'll tell you this. It's kind of what I attribute a lot of this to is in the wrestling world, and this is something that I'm absolutely like passionate about breaking down, is there's this kind of concept about it's never enough, because the idea is that you've always got one more rep, one more takedown, like in the match when you're exhausted and all these things, you got to do one more. And wrestling really feeds off of like, and it's a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful concept, because it's pushing yourself past the threshold that you could ever imagine. And this is why wrestling is so powerful. And when I see kids trying wrestling and I see them come off the mat and they're crying and they're sobbing and then they go and do another match, that's a powerful thing to see.
Yeah.
So there's this really
that like I can feel all this emotion and it doesn't control me if I keep going.
Yes.
It's not stopping me, and that's actually what allows it to come through for me. Way easier now. I'm like, I'm just gonna go cry in the desert for a while now. 2 hours later, I'll be fine.
Yeah, and then you'll be fine, right? Yeah, but then you can take it like with anything that is external. There's always like the light and dark side in a lot of ways, right? You can kind of misuse it. So I think right now there's a culture around wrestling that is a little bit misused in terms of, well, you can always do one more, and if you couldn't do one more, like maybe you didn't do enough at practice. Like there's always like you didn't do enough.
Totally. No, and actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because as somebody who's coming into skydiving later, and my body is more worn down just through life and living in New York and living in fourth floor walk up and like running in the streets of Brooklyn and then climbing the stairs with like all my laundry and stuff like that. I
Week
actually,
in New York with a friend, and
huh?
I did 1 week in New York with a friend, and it like ruined my body.
Oh, I know. It's so intense. And the thing is, it's like, so I actually don't agree with that push, push, push thing now, because there is, and it's interesting you bring it up, because there's a point where I say the good ego is as bad as the bad ego. It's the same thing. And for me, one thing, as somebody who actually has all these personal development skills, which I think, although part of me will get really sad that I didn't start skydiving when I was 25, I realized that I have a set of personal development skills that's probably why I'm still in the sport now, like after 7 years or whatever, because I have these tools to use when it's becoming, intense. And that pressure to go, 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 I'm a lot more like, if I make every jump valuable, and I process things as I go along, and maybe take it slower, but do it more mindfully, that I'm not going to burn out. And there are a lot of people that I started skydiving with who aren't skydiving anymore because whatever, I don't even want to speak to what their journey is, but it became unsustainable for them on some level. Whereas I was like, I'm not going to, and I became very sensitive to other people's desire to push me when I knew it wasn't in alignment with what I'm capable of, and also my understanding of how the psychological body mind system works. There's a point where you are not learning you're not learning as well as if as if there's more of a mindful approach to it, if that makes sense. And I am curious, because that pushing thing I have to push myself to get breakthroughs, but it's the amount of push which I think is really key. When it's actually a part of us that is driven from that I'm never good enough, it's actually a more shame-based pushing. Like, you're not good enough, you've got to do more. That's a shame-based energy pushing. It's not the same as a push, which is like, I know I'm near a threshold, and I need to face what's coming up and push through it, sort of consume, as I call it, kind of consuming the illusion at that point. And as you're a coach now, what's your take on that?
My take on that, the edge comes from that idea of the choice again, what I was speaking to earlier. When you feel yourself saying, like, I want to make excuses as to why I can't do it, and then the coach coming in and saying, I see that you're doing that, I see that you're trying to like make yourself small, and I want you to push yourself past. And so I do think that there's a really important role for the coach to say, give yourself the opportunity to prove that voice wrong.
Right.
And then there's like, I think that there's a threshold. Then there's like, done. You just did it. Okay, we're gonna move on, or you should walk away, or you should be proud of yourself.
Right.
And I think it really comes down to doing those things, those tasks with joy, because then you finish a session and you have joy about, oh, I did push past, instead of what I did for, I'm telling you, probably a decade, was I'd push myself past, and then I would be like, well, somebody out there did more or knows how to do it already or is better or something. So then I'd keep going, but I was reinstating, when I was doing those positions or that attack, that I wasn't doing it right anyways. Like, it was this bizarre.
And that starts going into your body mind system. And that was the big when I went from, so how I was when I did stand up, because that's the thing I was doing in my, like early 30s, and I was giving it my all, and that was my, thing. And that's the way that I see other younger skydivers go after skydiving, is the way I went after stand up, I was doing shows like 5 nights a week, sometimes 7 nights, just ever like there. But I also psychologically lived and died by every show. Like, if I had a great show, I was like, oh my God, here it comes, the sitcom's on its way, and then if I did a bad show, it was like, oh my God, I'm the worst person. And when I got into skydiving, I was like, you're not allowed to do it that way. You're again, and it's actually talking about that thing we were talking about before. When you give too much and you're actually building resentment and anger, you're creating that association with this thing that essentially you should be loving. And so for me, my approach is to monitor that within myself and just be mindful of that edge, because for me, it's about a sustained journey, which is, it's a little bit different when you're a pro athlete, I'm sure. And there's, I mean, I don't want to call it like a lifespan, but it's sort of a, you know, there's a prime time basically for you as, well, the mentality would be constantly like, I don't know, constantly like, this is the time, now or never.
In terms of like your lifespan as an athlete?
As an athlete, like to compete at that level.
Yes and no. I think there's certain sports that have that like really distinctively. I mean, like
Yes.
women's gymnastics, we've all seen like
Right.
the women that come back in their like early 20s. You're like, whoa, that's crazy, right?
Right.
For women in wrestling, I think it's unproven yet. I think we have men who competed like into their 40s, and women's wrestling is new enough, and I put that in air quotes mostly because first Olympics was 2004. We've been around. Like, this isn't new.
But that's really, the first Olympics was 2004 for women's wrestling?
Right, yes.
Oh,
and the
wow.
first world championships was in the 80s.
Wow. That's just crazy as well. Like, that it took that long for women's wrestling to be an Olympic sport, because men's wrestling's been in it for
the beginning
since they were in little Roman outfits and whatnot.
Right.
It's so interesting. So you really, oh my God, wait, I don't know if I want to go into a whole that, but that really interests me as well, for you as an athlete to be competing at a time when it's still relatively new. And I think this is probably where deeper, what we would call templates of conditioning. So I think a lot about, you know, what makes somebody have a winner's mindset. And I used to think about like Australian tennis players, and a lot of the really successful ones were really good looking, you know, and I don't think it was just that they were fit and healthy. They were, I would look at these things and thinking about Australian culture, be like, these guys they're good looking. It's kind of an entitlement, basically. Like they're always used to winning, if that makes sense. They're used to getting the chicks. They're used to like landing the goal, basically. I mean, nobody's that, but in terms of when we're talking about a leading edge psychology, basically, when somebody has essentially come up in their life with a sort of blessed vibe, it's easier for the conscious and unconscious programming to already be aligned with success.
Right.
And so when we talk about cultural things that influence us as human beings, it's the same stuff that I went through in stand-up, where literally every night I was told women weren't funny. That to be in a sport as a woman that's being acknowledged so much later than the men's right to have that space. Because when we're talking about the shadow, we're not even just talking about what's our obvious like thing, you know, like I'd never got to play a full game in netball, you know, and so being in an extreme sports, that often memory comes back where I was like always sent off at halftime. Like, not an athletic person, you know, I'm not, you know, that like I'm just not very good at sports. Or I see something that I'm constantly also, you know, on the, you know, wrestling, haha, no pun intended. But so I'm interested for you, if you have an awareness of that, like that, even that wrestling is a new women's wrestling is newly welcomed into the arena of elite sports. If that has an effect on you on some deep level in terms of your value or your place, I mean,
hugely,
yeah.
this impacts every female wrestler, whether they like it or not.
Right.
Every single female wrestler has been impacted by this, because we're entering into something that already exists. So hence template that already exists that we are supposed to fall in line with.
Right.
And for me specifically, it showed up with, I think I've always had this really keen understanding for the sport before my body connected to it. And I would not say that I was super athletic, but I always tried really hard.
Yes, that's what I have, tenacity for sure over natural
because
skill.
Seeing
that's
my
go a long way.
Yeah, it does. It does. And seeing my old videos, most people would be like, are you sure you eventually get to the level you do? Because I'm long, gangly. I was often told, well, you don't really look like a wrestler. You know, you have this image of like short, muscular, like strong. And that's what I had the image of too. So every time I saw my opponents who were shorter than me, which most of them were, I'm 5'7", and I wrestled just most of my career in senior level. I wrestled like 112 to 117 or to 120 was where I wrestled.
Inches? Is that you're talking inches? Centimeters? 120?
Pounds.
So okay.
I wrestled 51 kilos up to 55 kilos.
Okay. So yeah, okay. So, and that's actually, well, gosh, I just want to bring this up because sometimes when I'm talking to my coaches and when you're talking about the stuff about, well, what's an excuse? I've had to really sit with that because being older and also have like autoimmune, I've got like some, like stuff going on. And I've had to sit with that. Where is my mind taking this as an excuse? But because the thing is, it is actually, and what I got to was like, they're factors. They're not excuses, and they're not reasons to not keep going, but they are factors that if you consider them, they can actually, you're not pushing against yourself so much that you're actually feeling shitty, about it, basically. So I'm always like, these aren't excuses because I'm going to keep going, but they are factors that I need to be aware of because I don't want to tear my body up. And if I'm so that's always an interesting dance with coaches when they're like, no, you like, no excuses kind of thing.
Right, no excuses.
Like, it's not an excuse, but it is a factor. If you deny this factor in me, because my body is actually, it's showing you the limitation when it can't, I might need to exercise more. I might need to, once you accept it as a factor, then you can start to have solutions. But if you don't accept it as a factor, then you're just making it unconscious and it's more likely to sabotage, I believe.
Yeah.
And I just diverted off what you were saying, but I wanted to bring that up because this thing about the height differential or whatever, you can't, whatever that means in terms of your sport, if you accept it as a factor, then you can find something that works, how you can work with that rather than it just being, I mean, does that resonate with you?
So much.
Yeah.
So much. And yeah, I mean, I think there's so many little pieces in here, when it came to like this idea of like a different body type, right? It's something a little more like unique. On top of that, I'm a female. And so you've got like this idea of like, well, this is unusual to begin with. Oh, and you're tall and you're like all these factors. I love the idea that like the whole reason we have factors, we have like limitations is for the abundance of creativity. I think that's so beautiful because it wasn't until I had a coach, a Japanese coach, and she came to the Olympic Training Center. She was an assistant coach and she was the first person to really, instead of kind of like trying to fit me, like literally like the tall person in a square box, like my opponents were, she was like, no, everything you're doing, like try this, do it like this, open your body up more. Like she actually, I can't even express to her how appreciative I am of her mindset, because she actually helped me come into my own body where I had been trying to
Yeah.
escape it and be
Yes.
something else and figure out
Yes.
how to be something else. And she helped me see like the beauty in wrestling and in the way that I moved, because I thought I just moved weird and I was like pretty gangly and I couldn't like control my body very well. And she just,
That's how I feel. Like it's like a boiled egg on legs. Like there's a lot of limbs, and it takes more mindfulness to control the long body. Yeah.
yeah. And I remember something that my dad actually said like years previous. He had passed in 2012. And this coach I started working with her probably like 2014.
Mm.
But when he was coaching me, he would say like, just stand up. Like he was like always this mindset of like possibility. Like,
Right.
oh, that's not working, just like do something else. And that
Right.
was hard for me to wrap my brain around, because I always wanted like a very linear solution. I wanted like particular answers. I wanted it to be like A, B, C, and D, because that was like the hard worker I was. If you just give me the
Yes.
recipe, I will do the recipe and I will do it over and over again and I will do it really hard. And I didn't love this idea that like it's unknown. Like nobody knows the answer.
Right. Oh,
Nobody
that's
has a
so
perfect solution
interesting.
for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love that, because I think when you look at like exemplary performance really in anything like acting, sports, so I'm just pulling on my big repertoire of reference points here. But actually, there's an interesting idea in photography too, where when a photograph has a thing that they call the punctum, which is actually this sort of interesting imperfection, that's what really draws us into something. And the sort of the crime of the good ego that seeks that perfection and that linearity, and that like, if I'm a good girl, I'll just, keep doing the same thing. The genius is, often comes from that unusual edge that makes something then go into like an exceptional exemplary stage. And that is the space I believe we do access when we're in beyond the mind, because we're no longer being controlled by the good or the bad ego at that point. We are open channels for what our spirit, our consciousness is trying to enact through us. And the point to me of discipline is to, and just doing things over and over again, is to, so you get to that point where it's no longer an act of the mind anymore in a way, and it's just something that's coming through you. Does that make sense? Do you resonate with that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because then you're blocking you that being so linear blocks you from what's next and blocks you
Yes, that's right.
from potentiality, because you're just in your head.
And
Without
that
the other.
is the nervous system. And that's often why when, say, you get, and this, okay, so, oh my God, all these things I want to talk about. But when you're talking about the Olympic training center, which almost is like a tribe that then you start being in, because I'm always, talking about how our nervous system is unconsciously controlling us. And when we get into tribal situations, because we want to align with the tribe, once again, our nervous system will keep us behaving in alignment with the tribal construct. So we'll be safe, so we'll be fed, so we won't be rejected and die out, by ourselves. That for you, when you were talking about your journey of going for the Olympic trials for the third time, you almost needed to leave that trial to rediscover your unique way that you were going to do this. And that's a very scary thing. It's always scary to leave a tribe, but we're not in the caves anymore. We don't evolve unless we leave our tribes a lot of the time, even when we have a lot of positive conditioning and programming from a certain tribe. In order to become your unique self, there's often still that need to do something different or have a new influence to come in, which sounds like what this woman was, is that she was able to come in with some, breakthrough thinking for you that would help you access something new and beyond your former identity self.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note of leaving the training center situation and then deciding, okay, I think I'm going to come back. I didn't have a coach, and I still never really quite had like in traditional sense coach, because my husband became my coach and he stepped up to the plate in that role. But I think once that started, that dynamic started showing up, and it was like COVID, like, you know, I didn't have access to the coaches that I had then found. They were at like a local university, no access to them, right? And so all of a sudden I have virtually nobody.
Wow.
And I think that that was actually the complete shed of realizing, yes, that like that it was myself. It was that the coach had to come from within, as much as I wanted to fight that and say, no, somebody else out there had like the answers for me. The journey that I'd already had and the blessing that my dad gave me was this ability to learn from others. Even though he was a phenomenal wrestler and he was a main coach of mine, he still preached this idea of learn from everyone, absorb from everybody. And so I had that backbone to then start realizing, okay, it does have to come from me and from within, and that there isn't really an expert, and the expert is within me, and that's who I have to depend on.
And that really is the spiritual quest at the end of the day, you know, and so, you know, the student has become the teacher, you know, like that's so much of people who are on like spiritual journey are, you know, they're seeking to shed and to become, basically to shed the identities, even the things that have been helpful. At a certain point, every like spiritual initiation that I've gone into that's taken me into like a next level of consciousness, the point of the initiations were that the things that I understood to be helpful to get me to that point now also needed to be released and let go of in order to break through into a next level of consciousness. Because the only way we can come to our next level of consciousness is to actually go outside of our old identity, which is really an act of surrender and a willingness to shed the things that might have been very helpful to a certain point of our survival, to face thyself. I've done a lot of that navel gazing, you know, of like, oh, so that's very interesting and that's sort of really when this journey, maybe you became more open to it as a little bit of more of a spiritual quest.
Right.
When you were basically on your own, you had to, your soul was like, come on, Katherine, now it's you.
It was. And I've always really understood the mind-body connection, because and the awareness you have to build, because just like you were speaking to earlier about that awareness and building that awareness, wrestling, every session you do, every training session you do, you're trying to build more and more awareness. Can I be aware that once I finished this takedown, my hands were in the wrong place, or I was thinking about where my head was and not my feet? So you have to keep, then you're like, I'm going to do it again and have awareness this time about like my pinky, like every aspect of your body can be involved. And you're like, now this time I'm going to do it with more pressure, or I'm going to do it with less pressure and more fluidity. So you have to continue. So and during that time, you're processing all those, whatever emotions come up. You're building awareness. You have, first starts with like recognition, then awareness, changing the behavior, integrating it, and then trying to train through that again. And then sometimes you fall out of it, right? And you have to come back into it. So it starts from like the ground level of wrestling, of having to integrate that over and over and over. Because it's not such it is repetitive, but every time your opponent moves a little different. So you have to have that awareness too, that they could move and now you have to adjust your movement, or you have to be in that flow state so that you can actually predict. And predict without predicting that there will be change, right? Yes. So to me, you could take almost like a lifetime of like processing and put them into like a wrestling season, and somebody will come out, and that's why these you speak to any wrestler, they will tell you like wrestling was the greatest gift of my life. There's not a single person who hasn't tried wrestling who hasn't said it was intensely hard or gave me these gifts, because it helps you process things constantly. You're having to work through them. And actually, you know, as much as I wanted to, as much as this like spiritual journey I started building into in this second half of my career, as much as I wanted it to result in being the Olympian, being an Olympic champion, there's also the awareness that I have to take the things that I'm learning and put it into this construct and put it into these like limitations or the things, you know, or the factors like you're talking about.
Wow.
There's so many things that I can't control, which is what showed up a lot of Olympic trials, like a lot of things out of my control and a lot of thoughts that came up and a lot of things that I didn't expect. And so I'm building this acute awareness, and I have a lot of, you know, it's like in your rest digest state, you can have those moments in that loose, like being lucid about like I have complete awareness of this, but then you get into the construct of wrestling and the environment and all these different things, and it's kind of like being okay that you're like, I'm trying to take something that I have complete understanding of, at least right now, like in my current state, and putting it in a completely different environment and testing it out.
Oh, totally. And I can do, you know, I can sit here like blah, blah, talk about consciousness till the cows come home, but skydiving forces me to see in myself the absolute petty like, you know, the mind, just the mind is so activated by this sport that it is a constant, more than anything apart from maybe dating, it is a constant process of revelation of how much of my, you know, unintegrated teenager, like my like, you know, like, because the sport itself, because there is a risk factor, there is a natural you know, a self-protection or a tribal thing that on the, you know, on the packing mat is pretty, you know, there's like a lot of high school dynamics out there, like who's going to jump with who and what's going to, you know, like, and it's, you know, it's a vibey scene, and but that's all kind of part of, for me to be aware of what parts of myself still need work on, because I don't apart from visiting my mother, actually I don't think anything's quite as triggering and revelatory as this process that I'm in, and it's, you know, I think that's the amazing part about it. And you know, just sort of like reflecting back at you, everything you're saying, that these activities are continuously going to be a part of that revelatory process of self. Even, and I have to laugh about this, like I was so, I forgot to bring this up, I was so excited about doing, I was having like this massive week, and it's going to lead me into a question from our that someone sent in. I was so excited about doing this interview with you, and also in this week leading up, I was coming up to, I had big breakthroughs in the tunnel, where I did this thing I've been working for forever, which is like learning how to doing a head down transition in the tunnel. That's another whole thing. I've been working for like years on this thing. I got my head down transition, and I was about to have my 1,000th skydive, which has been given the inauspicious beginnings. It was something that my mind has been sitting with the meaning of that for me, and the things that I've had to face within myself to keep going, and, you know, all this kind of stuff that we're talking about. But I was so excited. It was like literally Friday, I had my best skydive ever. I'm like, I'm going to do my 1,000th jump tomorrow. On Sunday, we're going to do this, you know, live stream with Katherine. And that night, the Saturday night, I was so revved up. I was up all night, and all my petty teenage stuff was coming up, and all the, like, you know, inner child stuff was going on, and I barely slept. And then the next day I got really, really sick. And this is an absolute classic subconscious body mind act out right before what I consider two thresholds, which is like these kind of breakthroughs that I've been having with skydiving and being able to fly on my head. And doing this YouTube with you and kind of introducing the, you know, like a different format from the work that I've been doing where there's a little bit more of a public discussion thing going on. And I got really sick for 10 days and my whole body was on fire. And I know that it was another kind of, you know, mental and emotional and physical and energetic purification.
Yeah.
But I thought I was there. You know, my mind was like, tomorrow's the day. I've done it, baby. You know, I'm like 1,000 skydives and I'm going to get like a bunch of cool people to do a cool job. And then wha-pow! There, you know, the devil came up, but I could see my thinking. I could see it was very revelatory. I was like, wow, you are really being petty about it's like you're in a teenager is out of control. So that biological sabotage is something that I also wanted to talk about, because that was one of the questions I got, which I'll just read. That this is from Eleanor, and she said, you know, I'm an endurance athlete and I struggle with my own mind during training. My question for Katherine: did you experience a time during your training when your mind said you could not, and your body seemed to confirm this with pain and or injury? And how did you move past this to a belief that you can? And that's a constant struggle for me in skydiving. I want to turn it over to you.
Oh, okay. So there's the two aspects which we've been like in discussion with that, right? Like is it, you know, the first is the awareness. Am I pushing because of the good ego? And because I've been told like I need to do more, I need to there's not, you know, there's not a matching of like enough, like me being enough. So I think there's an element of that, because it always comes back to like, what is the underlying factor here that's, you know, my mind is showing up in this way. And I had a coach tell me that, and it stuck with me for forever, that when you go into a training session and you're in a completely different, we've all been there. Anyone who's done any kind of sport, we've all been there, where you're like, my head is somewhere else. And it's not even like, oh, I can't focus and I got to figure out how to focus. It's more like I'm so like spent, or something is off, that you're not even getting anything out of this training session. And he was like, this is the time that you leave. Like, leave. Because you're not, it's basically what he was saying was, you're not energetically matched with your ability to then go in and train. And just like Eleanor's kind of saying, like, and then your body confirms it, and then potential injury and all these things start showing up. So is it the most important thing to go in and finish that training session? Okay, there's a moment of that when it's like, okay, I can push past, and it's and I needed that. And then there's the moment of like, I actually didn't need that. I actually need to stand up for myself and take a step back and say, I'm not going to do this, because there's 100 other things you can do. Guaranteed that, especially as an endurance athlete who is running. And typically, like for a wrestler, I have some cross training I can do. I can be like, I'm going to run for my cross training, right? And sometimes I think endurance athletes are like, well, I run and then I run and then I run forever. So, but there's still always something you can do. What can you step back and see that your body, your mind actually needs? Because is it running today, or is it like a way to take care of your mind and your body, and that connection that's showing up?
Yep. Because I feel like when there's that much resistance going on, my opinion now, based on the work that I do, is that for me, it's usually that actually I need to integrate some kind of piece of psychological charge, because it also, in my experience with working with people with chronic illness and injury and stuff, it's been the moments that they've physically pushed through those moments without doing the integration on the psychological level, that then the body will act out even more. It'll be like, all right, well, fuck you. You didn't listen to me when I gave you a little bit of pain. How about I just break this shit and sit down and have a think for a while?
Yeah. And I had a training camp. Well, we had a big dual meet. It was during COVID. So everyone came together. We did a big dual meet. We were like in this bubble situation, and then we were going to have a training camp after. And a friend of mine, she and I pull cards often, and I can't tell you how often I would get this card that says like I can't remember the card.
Is it a tarot card?
It's a tarot card, but it's not the traditional one. It's a different one. And it basically is like injury, and illness on its way, basically.
Pentacles.
And I would be like, what? I'm feeling great. So this training, we pulled one card, and it was this card. And it was like, I was like, what? I'm feeling great. And then all of a sudden I had this very bizarre, I can only describe it as like rhabdo in a way, if you know what that is. It's like when you have muscle overuse. It happens to CrossFitters a lot. And my whole body like tensed up. I couldn't even like train because my body was just like tensing up so bad. And this camp, we're finally together with our national team, the other women, and now I can't train. Like, are you kidding me? And I had to like lay in a hotel bed while everyone went to go train. And it was the best. And so my body was confirming like, you actually need to stop. And so I let myself stop. Yes.
And that's the difference that wisdom has given me. It's like, if my body's getting sick, I'm actually going to let it heal. I'm not going to push through because, Codral, that's an old ad for conflict, but yes, the pushing through. Sorry, keep going. I just interrupted you there. But that's the wisdom part of being in tune with your body, which I think is very important, even as you're pushing it.
Yes, and most likely it's going to be more surprising and more challenging to step back, stop what you're doing, change what you're doing, like make a different choice. That's probably the harder choice, even though it feels really good to be like, I need to push past my threshold. Well, like something's telling you that your threshold, like that your body needs the break, and that your threshold is actually going to come from you taking a step back and learning how to like chill and actually say, if I take a few days off, I'm actually okay. Because maybe you're entering into kind of the danger zone of like, I'm training just to win all these things instead of fighting the joy. Step back, and then you're like, ooh, I kind of miss it. Like it only takes like a couple days, and I'm talking like 2 or 3 days to start feeling that like I'm missing it. And every single time I have had injuries, which I've had a lot of injuries, a lot of surgeries, me leaving the sport for a solid 2 years with my son and then coming back, all of those moments put me in a better position as an athlete than just training through.
100%. And that's where I think, and whether you want to call it like a masculine versus a feminine way of working, where when we're being driven by the mind, go, versus being in tune and actually listening to the body and listening to this sort of wisdom that's inside of us. Because again, that was part of my different approach with when I was doing stand-up. It was just very like, I had that driving good ego, like, thing going on. And this has been more like, I'm okay. I call it when I get I call it the fuck yeah in my body. When I wake up with the like the hell yeah, I want to skydive today. That's the day to go out and do it. And I truly believe that if I wait for those moments, what I've actually done, like if I've been going for it like in the tunnel or whatever, that what is actually happening is that if I don't feel it, it's because my body is still trying to integrate some of the learning that I've already done. And that when I get that, hell yeah, I'm ready and I'm recharged, it means that learning is cooked. And now I'm ready to get the next level of learning in. And if you push past that, I think for me, it takes me out of the state, which is what we call the ventral vagal state, where you're actually in a learning, processing state of your nervous system, rather than survival or collapse, when you've pushed yourself so far that you actually collapse and get into that like depression and stuff. I mean, like I could do another, well, we didn't even touch on, there's so many things I want to touch on, but we've already touched on a lot. But that, how does that resonate for you? Like, I think when
Yeah.
you're talking about the joy, to me, that's the sign the expansion is coming and it's ready to go. It's the next, my consciousness system is ready to actually take in the next lesson.
Right. Absolutely. And there's something about the rigidity and the tenseness around being like, I'm training, I'm consistent. Yes, consistency is like absolutely key. And that's why I was saying, like, we can step back and do something else. Like, there's always something else.
Yeah.
But in the same vein, it's like, do something else so your body can process. And then, like you said, like, I love that I had this imagery of like, ding, like the light bulb goes off, your like
Yeah.
little turkey uh
Yeah.
cooker like pops out, right? And you're like, okay, I feel like I'm in a different state. And if anyone's like me, I know a lot about like my human design, and I know that I'm emotional. I'm a
What are you?
manifest.
What's your human design?
I'm a manifester.
Oh, you're a manifester. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which has been interesting to integrate because of this whole idea of like kindergarten teacher and not this like
Right.
lioness, you
Because
know?
manifestors are pretty like intense, and they're supposed to kind of like blast forward without so much regard of what people think or what other people's opinions are, because their role is to be a bit of a groundbreaker and stuff.
Yeah. And on top of that, I've my emotional center is defined.
Yes, me too. Yeah.
So it's like I will feel like, well, like it's the worst thing. I'm the worst. Like I'll feel that intensity.
You have to do the
And
cycle.
yeah, and then if I let it cook and let it, and then I come out and I'm like, oh, it wasn't quite as bad. I took 2 days off and I went and swam, or I just chilled, and then
I
I
come
came
back
back
stronger.
and practiced
Yeah.
it.
Like that's what I mean. It's feeling the rhythms. Now I've learned, okay, like when I got sick this past week, in the past I'd be like, well, I gotta be, make it a productive time because I'm just like, I've rented a team, or whatever, just stupid stuff. And now I'm like, no, I'm just gonna lie down. And if I look after myself in that time, I truly believe that those sicknesses are like a shedding. And if I looked after myself in that time, everything that I face, because I often get like really broken down when I'm sick, and I'm like, what is the purpose of my life? And, who am I? And all this stuff. And like, what, do I even? And it's actually just because I'm so drained. I don't love anything that I'm doing anymore. And if I let that process happen and I observe the thoughts, I do all my love and acceptance work as I'm going through it, I come back stronger and healthier afterwards. And in a world where I am pushing, boundaries in terms of age of what I'm doing and this sort of thing, I think that purification cycle is how I don't let the factors become detractors, basically, but it's creating a space to let all the thoughts, feelings, emotions come up about the illusions that I have about possibility at this time, genuinely processing it, and then coming back with the expansion of that whole process, rather than forcing a robot behavior through it. That's why I generally believe in the process. And because I've worked with so many people who haven't psychologically processed along the way, that's why they're chronically ill and sick, and we're catching up. But I think part of my passion for talking about this is to encourage people to incorporate psychological processing as they're doing this stuff, so their body doesn't subconsciously sabotage them, so they don't injure themselves or get sicker or develop something really chronic, because they've actually been denying those signals from their body that there's something else that needs to happen before the body can go to this next level.
Yeah, I mean, there's a constant cycle, and it's like things are catching up, and that's something that I always found really fascinating with wrestling, is that as much as I would want, and I could like visually see myself doing something, I'm like, it hasn't caught up yet. And being patient with myself in those moments is intensely hard, and something that you and I kind of were talking about and processing from matches that I had was this idea, like, if you're not fully present, sometimes the match just like passes you by and you didn't realize what happened, and staying fully present. You know, the match at Olympic trials, the last match that I wrestled, which is the one that I lost. And if I had won, I would have gone on to the finals to wrestle off for the Olympic spot. So there, you know, there's a lot of extra pressure on it and all these different things. And I can distinctly remember when I snapped out of being present.
Interesting.
And it was terrifying. Because on top of being like, I've prepared so long for these kinds of moments or these kinds of things, it basically was, I had complete awareness of my thoughts all of a sudden, and not in the way of like letting them pass like the clouds, like mindfulness ideas. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm here. Well, it was like a what am I doing here kind of moment.
Right. Do you think there's some with the pressure of it, that there's some almost out of body thing that's happening at that point in a way, like, and not in a witness, like witnessing as an observer what's going on, but literally a survival out of body thing that's happening, or you know, like a disassociative thing?
You definitely disassociate with your body sometimes when you snap out of like maybe being in a bit of a flow state, or in a, because it's challenging. It's hard to get into flow state. I think it's something that literally every person in sport is trying to do. And to snap, sometimes when you snap out of it, you can still be in the performance and you're just like in the grind of it. And you're like, wow, I'm really in my thoughts and it really sucks, but I like just kind of like dug my heels in and went anyways. This time it was very much like a disassociation, and all of a sudden a realization of being there and feeling the intense fear of that, and being like, oh shit, I'm here. I'm snapped out. It was like such an awareness of like, I snapped out of it. Oh my gosh. And it was almost like very movie-like, things went silent. You can maybe hear your pulse in your ears. Like, it was like very strangely movie-like. And then got caught in a position I really had never really been caught in before, you know?
And I know that we had part of our prep work that we had done, which is part of the work that I do with this sort of resistance activation release. We do work with visualizing, as I said, like the worst case scenario and best case scenario with certain opponents. And I know that the woman who finally went to the Olympics for the US team, we had done work, preemptive work to prepay, working through unconscious fears and stuff like that before you wrestled her.
Right.
But it was actually this other ring-in who patted you on the head.
Yep.
Which we hadn't worked with her, the concept of her energy and how she was going to wrestle you or anything, or what your fears were around it. That it was sort of like this other thing came through the side door, basically.
Yeah, no, it definitely did. And the last two times we had wrestled, I had finished the match. Basically, it's called a technical fall. So I beat her 10 points above, like if she had scored 2 points and I had 12 points essentially, but I had beat her probably 10-0 the last two times.
Right. So
your mind creates the illusion that, what do I need to worry about there? Like, I kind of like, I had confidence that I just needed to go in and do what I needed to do to finish that match. And I'm like, I've done it before. I know what I need to do. I know where I need to perform. And it was a surprise to snap out of that moment of being present and then not find it. And then she took advantage of that moment. It was like, maybe she most likely, without even, she probably couldn't even tell you, or maybe she could, that she energetically felt a shift.
Yes.
Guaranteed. That she felt a shift, and she saw and took an advantage of a position. And not tooting my own horn, but the amount of times that I've been pinned in my long career has been very seldom.
Right.
Very seldom.
So it's a bit of a shock, you know, if you're not used
Always
to
a shock. It's like Katherine got caught and pinned, and holy moly, because either I just like,
you don't have enough practice getting out of it, basically, at that point.
Yeah. Or
I mean, you probably do from training, I don't know, but
right.
under those circumstances.
Yeah, more like it was such a unique set of situations in a fluke position. All of a sudden you're caught on your back and you're like, whoa. And I've been on my back for sure and gotten off, and like those things have happened. But yeah, the few times that I've actually been like, I've lost a match based on a pin,
Mm.
very seldom. So
Because you are more, well, I remember, I was talking about it, and a big thing was like, what do I need to do to keep my composure so I actually don't lose control and do something rash, which to me is where, again, because I'm not a wrestler, I'm all like, aren't you all just getting in there and tussling around, and that it's actually so measured.
mhm.
In this thing, that when you look at it, and that's also part of why I'm like, oh, is it actually really physically scary? Because in some ways it looks very measured, but at the same time, I didn't realize how measured it actually is in terms of strategy and stuff like that, and kind of keeping your cool and sustaining your energy, I suppose, which was
All of those things.
all of
Yeah,
those
all of those
things.
things.
So I
Sure.
want to, oh God, I want to actually really ask this question, because I know we've got some videos as well, but I think we probably might need to wrap it up shortly. But I did want to ask this question, which is another question about generational energy, because you come from, and when I was in Hollywood, I always go, well, look, if I was gonna, because everyone's like nepotism, it's a thing, and I'm like, but if I was a soul incarnating to become a bit really famous celebrity, like one of the most clever choices you probably could make as a soul would be to be born to somebody who's already like successful in the industry, and you
True.
incarnated. Your father was a champion wrestler. He was an Olympic coach. You're saying, from what I've heard, is that you already felt an instinctive connection to the sport. It wasn't like, so I'm curious about two things. One, yes, how much influence do you think your father being that person had on you to get into the sport, where maybe it didn't always feel like your personal choice for yourself? And two, I watched the video, and when you were speaking about your dad and what a trailblazer he was with women's wrestling. And but even between the time when he was coaching women and had a pretty strong intuitive connection, and I was reading his blogs that he wrote, where he actually brings up the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, which, so he obviously was, he was loose consciousness, an open consciousness for mystical ideas, or ideas of whatever consciousness. But that the things that you may have learned from him as a coach, that as you have evolved as an athlete and moving into this kind of new age of sports, or whatever we're moving into as a collective, what are you shedding from his way, or what was significant for you to actually have to shed, even like that, my dad, I admire him, he's been this huge thing, but I actually don't think he was right in this thing, or there's actually a better way. So, because this is about you becoming your own identity, your own identity as a wrestler, as a coach in the sport. Yeah, tell me about what do you think you're like shedding in terms of the legacy there?
Well, I think you're actually helping me process things I never thought about right now, real time. I think that's really incredible to think about it being something I'm meant to be a part of. So, like, partially my choice. And I've always felt like this strong tie to wrestling. And given my rocky beginnings with it, and I have very early memories of feeling like, oh, I'm not really, like, my sister was very quickly good at the sport.
Right, so she was
And
in
I had early thoughts of like, wow, I might not be good enough. So for the fact that I had those thoughts so early, you would think that like what most kids are just like, I don't like the sport, like I'm not good at it, I don't want to do it. But for some reason I like kept returning to it. So you're probably onto something there, and now I'm gonna have to go explore this and I'm so fascinated by all of it. So the first thing that comes to mind when you're asking some of these questions is my dad was coaching my sister and I very later in his life,
Okay.
um, and in his 60s and his 70s. And I think he was in a conscious state of being very philosophical about everything. And I, like I said before, I felt like, I wanted like the linear answers. Wow. I'm like, don't give me like I can't process that up. You know, he was clearly in a higher consciousness.
Yeah, he's a what the bleep, and you're all like,
yeah, and I'm just trying to like, but just give me the answers. Do I put my foot over here or over here? Like I don't, you know, and so there was the element of
he's all wax on, wax off. You know, yeah. When do I learn karate? He's like, clean the car.
Exactly. So there's elements of that I'm now like, I understand now. I think the biggest thing that I received from him was, I don't know anybody who loved wrestling more than my dad. I am still to see, like, I'm still available to be proven wrong that my dad loved wrestling unlike anybody else, because everything he did was wrestling, and it wasn't in this like overly obsessive way. It was just like pure joy, love. He could be on a wrestling mat all day. He could be helping, coaching, wrestling, whatever it was. He could just be in wrestling. And I was like, I need a break. I can't stand wrestling. Oh, I'm so emotionally in it. And like, so that was the gift from him, was I came back to wrestling to find my love for it.
Right.
Because I just did it to like, I wanted to win and I wanted these goals. And then it was like, why was it so hard for me? And so I wanted to come back and like find the joy. The thing that I think that I don't necessarily want to say he got wrong, because I really think that it was just the circumstances that helped me come to this perspective.
Totally. Yeah. It's more of an evolution where you're evolving to. Yeah.
Was the type of guidance I needed as a young athlete. I don't feel like it was there. So now I have a very strong sense of understanding of like, what does a young athlete need? Because I think my parents were both very focused on like, we don't want to push them in the sport. We don't want to push this on them. We don't want to push, but I needed a little more directional guidance of like, hey, you do need to go to this camp. Like it will make you better. You do need to take this step. It will, like they were hands off and they let us do our career how we wanted, even though they were so involved in the sport. Right. Like both my parents were like hugely in the politics of wrestling. My mom still is. She's on the board of USA Wrestling.
Oh, so you come from like royalty all the way around.
Yeah, in wrestling.
Pretzel royalty.
So now I feel really strongly like, hey, these young athletes, they don't need to be pushed and they don't need to be like burnt out, but I can see the balance of the guidance. Like, hey, I'm not going to tell you, oh, just enjoy and just maybe go to this tournament or not. I'm going to be like, if you're going to this tournament, you need to go to this camp. You need to prepare in this way. Like, so a little bit of a stern structure, but then give them fluidity like within it, and be like, while you're in it, how can you make the best of it? When do you need to take breaks? Like, but you're in it.
Such a dance, because I have like multiple like tunnel coaches, and tunnel indoor skydiving is by far more stressful than skydiving, by far more stressful, and takes so much more out of me physically, mentally, emotionally, everything. It's a lot more intense on the nervous system. And I have like, I call them like, there's the good cop, bad cop. They have to like good cop, bad cop you a little bit, because when the bad cop coaches are like, do this, and they're giving you that discipline or push, and then you have to go with the good cop for a while and just get back into the looseness and the fun and the play. But it's just like, I don't know. I mean, finding the right balance, and everybody's kind of got to also, I think, know how they learn, because that's one other thing, because I've done so much personal development work. I actually know how my brain works. I know how I take in information. I can explain to a coach the communication style that I need to actually learn, which most people don't even know that they have a necessary communication style under stress. It's something I learned when I learned hypnosis, basically learned how to hypnotize people, that people can take in information indirectly or directly. So, oh my God, Katherine, we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I know you have some videos. Maybe we've just got time to look at one before we wrap this up.
Yeah.
Or is there one that you feel like you really want to talk us through your experience here? And one thing I want to say about the shadow too is a lot of the times this is unconscious energy. Part of the thing of going into our unconscious is that a lot of what is actually unconscious to us is also our gifts and also our strengths and things that we didn't know we were allowed to have at some point. And so when I'm talking about the devil here, it's about, using this process to discover everything about yourself and to actually open up to receive more of yourself, to embody more of your power within yourself by not keeping all this stuff unconscious and actually embracing it. So I know you have some videos where it's kind of like what you were going through in the moment, like a little roller coaster, basically, internal roller coaster. Maybe we could pick one of those and you could just share us that inner journey.
Yes, I think we should do that one too. I'm like tempted to throw us with I'll start sharing my screen right now. Let's see here. Tempted to, I don't know if it's coming up yet.
It's not
yet.
Let me see, share screen. You should be able to.
Okay, hang on.
I mean, I want to see your whatever you feel good about.
Yeah.
Going.
No, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I was gonna say. The one from Olympic trials, but I'm like, we've been through that. I told you what happened.
Yeah.
Process that one.
Yeah.
But this is a fun one because I'm gonna scoot up just a little bit. Okay, so we're not just watching me hand fight forever. So this is a roller coaster one. Right now I'm up 3-0.
And this is during the Olympic trials, or what does this mean? What's this about?
This is actually an international tournament, and it was like my first ranking series. So United World Wrestling does these ranking series tournaments, and you get points, and then you can be ranked at the World Championships or the Olympic.
I actually was wondering whether you have ranks in wrestling, like in tennis, but then I saw that you were ranked in the top 10 in the world.
Yeah. We do. It's a little harder to kind of like quantify because not everybody is at the same tournaments always at the same time. Right. Then you can only take one representative per country per weight class at the World Championships and Olympics. So it gets a little muddled. I'm sure in other sports maybe it's similar, but so this is basically a ranking series and I got points out of it. But because I am in Italy. Right before January or February of 2020.
Okay.
So right before everything
closed.
Yeah. Which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So this match is quite a roller coaster because I'm up 3-0. I'm red and you'll see like my scores on the top there.
Actually, I was watching this earlier and I was like, how conscious are you of the scoreboard while you're wrestling? Do you know?
You know your score. You need to know your score. So then very quickly, you'll see my opponent attacks. And, in these kinds of moments, you're like, because you can see now.
I just got your leg. I just feel so protected.
Now you're starting to go into moments of panic because you're like, did I get scored on? I can't tell because I get scored on as if my back gets exposed past like 90 degrees.
Okay. And outside the ring? Or just on the back? Once you go outside the orange part, you're supposed to bring it back into the ring,
You're supposed to bring it back in outside of the orange. Yeah. Orange is kind of like danger zone. So then she scores 2 points. And now I know that the points have been scored.
Okay.
And what my coaches did is they threw the red block and they said, we want to challenge that. We don't think she actually got her back turned far enough to get 2 points. but this
Okay.
is kind of a danger zone. So I'm like awaiting my fate here,
Yeah.
because if I lose this challenge, she gets a bonus point. It's almost
Oh,
like you could be wasting everyone's time with this challenge. So I'm trying to overturn the 2 points, but I have to trust my coach that they made
yeah.
a good decision.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening, as I think we'll see very shortly, is that I lose that challenge.
So you in this moment where you've basically also broken momentum, like you've come out of maybe a bit of a super stressful moment because she had you grabbed your leg like that.
With
It's
my leg, she
terrible,
had my
woman.
head. Yes.
She had your head, just pushing you out. About mother hen on you. So you've got a moment to breathe, but you've also got what's going on in your head right now. Are you focused on whether you're going to win the challenge? Are you regrouping yourself? What's happening here?
Trying to stay present, because I can't put expectation. Your mind is saying like, okay, I hope I don't lose. And you can see now they gave Blue 1 point. I lost the challenge. And now she has an underline and she is ahead. She's now winning the match. So I have to stay present during that time and not have any expectation, because I have to come back in the match. And here's like the next crazy scramble.
Yeah.
So I go from like winning.
Yeah.
I love the scramble. It's so wild. There's no points have been scored yet because she doesn't have full control. Neither do I.
Right. So it's just a big tussle here.
And then she exposes me. I think, yes. So I got turned my back. And I believe she gets another point for a takedown. But no, I think she just got 2 for exposure. So now
what's exposure there when
she tilted me towards my back. All they need is like 90 to break 90 degrees.
Oh, okay. So you don't even have to be pinned. So now she's got you and you're just like,
now we've got a minute and a half and I've got to go. And very quickly. This was an exciting match.
So exciting. Oh my God.
And you'll see my excitement. And so it went from, so my poor opponent, I think she got some hair in her mouth, but we went from, from winning and being like, cool, I'm winning the match, and you still have that, like you're aware of the score and you're like, I'm winning, and then all of a sudden you get caught in a compromised position. I didn't plan on being there. And now I'm like, you're literally feeling that drop in your stomach. It's like it literally feels like a roller coaster.
Roller coaster,
Your stomach starts dropping, you start like panicking a little bit. Now you start going into like your true fight mode, because you're like, I'm gonna fight off my back. Am I about to get pinned? And then she creeped up like in that score, right? And sometimes things work out really, really well where you find the perfect, like, I think that this is a really awesome example of, I stayed very present in the moment of this match, and looked for opportunities.
You look for opportunities, and then you just came out firing like 6 cylinders. And
I
wonder, like, the momentum where you were already winning for a while, is there a belief and confidence that you're having just from having been in front that you can get it back? Because I always feel like it's always way harder if you're coming from behind to also find the strength. But that's a tenacity, even if you are. And I would just want to give a quick shout out, because my football team, Richmond, two things I wanted to point out is that often in regards to the girl who beat you in the Olympic trials, the teams that thrashed them at the beginning of the season, when they played them again later on, they were always the teams they absolutely demolished, because they'd obviously spent a lot of time studying the tapes and learning from those painful losses. But then developing belief through the roller coaster of going up and down. What's your thought? Did you feel you had that mental resilience or endurance that you could be losing at the beginning and still plow through to the end? Because you've still, regardless of whether you went to the Olympics after this sort of monumental journey from, you're still like a super badass top 10 in the world wrestler, which we're so focused on. Well, who like the sports don't get better unless everybody is ascending the sport as a whole. And there is a whole thing where the community actually feeds the growth of the sports, and the ultimate champions that come out quote unquote on top. And there often is enough recognition that going, oh my God, you're still a total badass. I mean, look at that video. I'm like, my God. So I just kind of babbled on then, but where do you think your mental resilience, coming from behind, do you trust your mental resilience is, I guess, was the question that I was asking for. How long did it take you?
I think that's like an evergreen process of working through that, because you get to a point where you're like, wow, I am, maybe I've had so many matches where I've just like pushed through and it's been great. It's all these things. And all of a sudden you hit a different scenario and you felt different and different things shows up. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, all that faith I thought I had kind of washed away. That's terrifying. So once again, I think it goes back to like some of those unseen, unknown circumstances that just kind of circle everything in your athletic career and your competition sphere. I think in that particular match, I was definitely riding the momentum of, hey, I've been taking her down. I was ahead. If I just continue my momentum, and I think there was a strong desire in me to be open to whatever shows up, because that's the attack that I did where I pulled her head down, and then I actually did something called like a knee pick, where I reached under and I pulled her knee and I brought it like towards her face. So then she starts going down towards her back. Not something I really work on very much. So in that way, I knew that I was, and I couldn't see it coming at all. I couldn't even like have the capacity to like understand that, oh, that's what's coming next. I'm gonna do this next. It was a moment of flow.
The flow.
So I think that I focused more on being in flow.
Yeah.
I did having to like grind and like, oh, I can grind it out, because my version of grinding it out sometimes, or like, I'm gonna have confidence. Maybe it's like that self-confidence, like yourself, like the fake positivity, right?
Right.
Positivity. So it was more in alignment of being open to what was present and just working hard on being in flow, because sometimes you have to work hard to be in flow.
I always say, whenever I'm thinking during a skydive, it's never a good thing. However, the thinking is a stage that you have to go through, because you have to develop the mindfulness of your body and doing this thing until it becomes this organic thing. So all of those stages are valuable, but the cool stuff happens in those flow moments. But essentially you still go through all of that other stuff to attain those flow moments. I don't believe, well, I don't want to put any point on it, but I think the flow state is something we're always earning in a way through transcending different things that are in resistance to it, which we can't transcend them until we face them, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Once it's transcended, then you've just opened another window into that state. Well, Katherine, this has been amazing, and we didn't even talk about half the things I wanted to talk about. But I just want to say it's such an honor to have worked with you. And honestly, when you were first calling me, had gotten very busy because the documentary had come out, and you were like, I'm a mom and I want to go to the Olympics. And I really actually didn't know what it, because you're so just lovely, not that it matters, but it was just, I didn't really realize what a badass you were until deeper into the process, because a lot of people are calling me all the time being like, I've quit my job and I want to do this thing, and I'm always supporting people's dreams, whatever they are, because it doesn't matter if people are going for things. My job is to facilitate that journey, whether they're going for health, whether they're going for whatever it is. I'm just facilitating a journey that someone has chosen to take for themselves, but it's been a real honor to get to meet you and to talk to you and to be able to share this discussion. And I think the other thing of resilience is that your journey continues and you have so much that you're still bringing to the sport and to the world through all that growth that you've had, all the wisdom that you've accrued from your journey, from your coaches, from your dad, from everything that you've wrestled. Like nobody, like it's really hard when we're going for like the top thing, because we're so set up to think if I don't get the top thing, then I didn't hit my goal. And it's very easy to undermine the actual huge amount of wisdom that you accrue along the way, even being at that level, and the value of that. And I think, I mean, just speaking to now, you've moved more into mentoring and coaching, and it's just kind of 2 years since those Olympic trials. Do you feel like you fully processed that to move into this next level of being a mentor with self-belief, with like the journey's not over, basically, right?
Right. I actually think that the really cool thing is that the more that I work with athletes, the more I get to process. So because as I've just learned now over the last, gosh, when I came back, it was like 2019. Yeah, 2019 was when I first had my first tournament back, and I've been processing since then. And it's just like, even the other day, I'm like processing things still, talking with my husband about like, hey, I feel like this and that, and this kind of came up. Or I talked with an athlete and I realized that I went through something similar, and then I'm helping. Like now I'm just so excited to process those things, because then I have revelations and then I share it with my athlete, and almost every time it aligns perfectly, because they are like working on something, I process it, and then I come back with just this revelation or just this understanding that helps them through that next thing, that next stage for them.
Yeah.
So it's constant. I think I've definitely done a good job of processing from Olympic trials. There's still a lot of hurt, there's still a lot of things to work through, but I think that's like the lifelong
I'm
journey.
Still constantly processing my stand-up career in skydiving, because all the things that were pains in the past can come up when I'm in that threshold resistance moment, like, and it's just, that is, I mean, that's the journey of us as human beings. Like some people are processing, which I am as well, and a lot of us are, our childhoods when we're going for goals. We are just going this thing of how do I integrate my past so I am the most powerful I can be in this moment. I'm not owned by my past, but also I'm able to gain or gather or utilize what I have from the past. And I think only that psychological process is what gives us access to that, so we can move forward into any next stage of life that we're going into anyway. Because people change in their life path all the time anyway as well, and our capacity to adapt from one life to the next is, I think, what keeps us in a vital state of existence. Well, anyway, I'm literally raving on right now.
No, it's so beautiful. Like this, I mean, this is why I started working with you, and this is why, like, the honor is also all mine, because it's been like a really incredible process, and I've learned so much in such a short amount of time. It's been really incredible, and I mean, you've been a huge part of me processing so much of my wrestling career. So that I'm so grateful for.
Well, my pleasure, and my joy. I love all my clients dearly, and they really mean a lot to me. And yeah, it's a very special thing. Katherine, so you've got Lucha Fit is your website now where you're mentoring people, upcoming, athletes. I know that you're coaching wrestling. Are you available for mindset work for people who maybe aren't
Yeah.
necessarily wrestlers, but they're just athletes or whoever going for a goal. I mean, we didn't even talk about, there's so many things I'm sure you have knowledge about in terms of
Yeah.
training and nutrition and all the so many things. Like I could talk with you for hours about it all. What's your dream now moving forward with your role as a mentor and a coach?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to, obviously my focus is on wrestling, like within the sport, girls need a lot of support and don't have a ton of resources or people out there like that. So my focus tends to be on wrestling, but I am more than excited to work with non-wrestling athletes, even if it's not, especially on the mindset side and on just these ideas of how to build consistency in your life, how to prep for competition. All these things are pretty universal. And I think, gosh, the big goal now, there's a lot and there's a lot of ideas, but the big goal now is making an impact on wrestling in a way that it gets to kind of transcend itself, and that I bring in a newer perspective to the sport, and it goes beyond where it's kind of been stuck at. And I think there's a lot of work to do there.
There's a lot, and that's the shadow. Like what, we are in a constant process of transcending things from the past that aren't necessarily serving the new collective experience of something as well. And I think there's a big movement in sports. And again, I'll bring up my football team, Richmond Tigers, when they hadn't won a grand final for 37 years. And they actually completely changed their club culture to one of love, which is amazing. We're talking about Australian rules football, which is like, it's just a very blokey world. That they brought in mindfulness coaches who encouraged developing love as the company, as the culture of the company of the Richmond Tigers. And in doing that, in the following year, they won 3 out of 4 grand finals. And their players are huge advocates of mindfulness, and they're really bringing, I think, this is where I see that role of sports reaching a lot of people. They're not all coming to me to get down the rabbit hole and get all woo-woo with the thing. It takes public figures in all different walks of life to be the integrated centers of consciousness that as humanity we need right now to overcome our collective trauma and just get into like a better places as a bunch of people hanging out together. So I see you very much in that role up there with the Richmond Tigers, which is like huge kudos to you.
Yes.
And I can't wait to see more of what your journey is going to be. And I hope you'll come back and talk more.
I hope so too. That sounds really great.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who's watching. And we'll see you next time on Circle Evolution YouTube Lives. Adios.
Wonderful. Bye.
Ciao.